Hi, welcome to American Reversion. I'm Steve Smith, and in case I decide to put this up over on integrated preparedness, welcome to you all also. I'm sure that most of you have heard, and you're as sad as I am to hear that Rush Limbaugh passed today. Um, it kind of, I had been intending to do a video about this anyway, to kind of address the thoughts that things have never been this bad. Um, we hear about all of our constitutional rights being shredded and the attacks um, on our traditions, and it's easy to think that things have never been this bad, but that's really lacking in perspective, and I've wanted to address this for a while, and because Rush passed today, it just kind of made me think that today would be the right day to do it. For those of you who like to pay attention to the books that I have behind me and that change depending on what kind of video I'm shooting, I have Rush's books up here today. The first one, The Way Things Ought to Be, and the second one is See, I Told You So. Been a long time since I read them. I read them when they first came out, and they're books that I keep around for the kids. And if you haven't read them, I suggest that you do. If you don't have them, you should have them, and just to have around. We lost somebody with unbelievable. Well, not just talent on loan from God, like he says, but insight. I think he was probably one of the most insightful political thinkers that there's been for quite a while. But going back to this, I wanted to talk about how things were before Rush came along, and then how things developed and how things are now. I remember when I first started listening to Rush, it was in right back after he went national. You know, he used to be here in Kansas City. Matter of fact, he used to live here in Overland Park. And then before that, he lived in Kansas City, and he told some stories. I don't know if I ever crossed his path. I don't remember him, but back then he was with the Royals. And I don't even remember why I started saying that, but it had to do with when I started listening to him. Um, in the late 80s. Yeah, I remember now. It was after he went national. He was out in Sacramento then, I guess, and he finally got his national syndication. So he was being played here in Kansas City. And like many people have said, uh, it was a much different world back then. It was the the news media was more um, solidified in their message than they are now. You may think that it's an echo chamber now. It's not near what it was back then, and Rush had everything to do with that. And so we would all hear about the same message coming out of the three networks every night, and there wasn't a 24-hour news cycle like there is now. You pretty much got your news on, the evening news, 30 minutes local, 30 minutes national, and then there were talk shows during the day, but they weren't substantial. When I heard Rush for the first time, it was like hearing somebody, and I'm not the first who has said this, but hearing somebody that with whom I agreed, and it was like a whole world opening up. You know, there were things that you really couldn't say, couldn't talk about in most of society, or people would call you a hater. So if you think this stuff about hate speech is new, it's not. If you think that cancel culture is new, it's not. He changed that. He changed that single handedly by coming on national syndicated radio and getting his message out. Now, I want to go back just a little bit and explain how things used to be before Rush, because they are much better now than they were before. If you look at presidents that have been conservative versus liberal, there's only been a few. Some will disagree with me on this, but JFK was conservative for that day. He would be considered a real conservative today. His positions, his economic positions, and such were almost identical to Reagan's. He was going to get us out of Vietnam. He did not believe in foreign entanglements and endless wars, and you see what they did to him. He also had some other political ideas that I won't mention right now, but you should look them up and do your own studying. And they killed him. Then came LBJ, the father of the Great Society, who brought us the welfare state in spades and liberalism on steroids. In response to, and he built up Vietnam, and then we had the riots and the civil rights movement and the movement against the war in Vietnam, and for any number of reasons that are too complicated to go in here, so I won't. That brought us in Nixon. Nixon was, not the conservative that a lot of people think that he was. And I won't go into detail on that. Some of that personally affected me, but that's not important right now. And if you remember Watergate, or for those of you who aren't old enough to remember it, if you've heard about it, two Washington Post, I think, reporters, Woodward and Bernstein, what were their names? Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward were the ones who cracked that story. It wasn't really much of a story compared to nowadays, but it made all the little social justice warriors, which weren't called that back then, want to go into journalism because they brought a president down. They brought Nixon down. Now, Nixon did stuff he shouldn't have done. He also did some stuff that, was good. Like so many of them, he was a flawed person, but good and bad. Nixon was, he wasn't impeached as some people think, that finally the evidence became so strong that that Republicans went up to him, members of Congress and the Senate, and said, hey, you're not going to be able to withstand this. You need to resign. And he did. And that brought us Gerald Ford, who wasn't much. And that brought us Jimmy Carter, who just took this country down into the ditch. And he brought us Reagan. And Reagan did as much to return our country's pride and strength around the world as anybody could have at the time. He went through his 2 terms. You'd see what they tried to take him out too, if you remember. That's another story you'll have to research for yourself, because so many people will say, no, that was just some crazy kid. Yeah, I don't believe that. That brought him, because he was such a popular president, that brought us George Bush, who was, people voted for him because they hoped they would get a 3rd term of Reagan and Bush. No, Bush was the New World Order guy. If you want to really, see who put the accelerator on the New World Order stuff, just go back to old George Herbert Walker Bush. He wasn't a strong figure. He was a kind of a background figure, and he got beat by Bill Clinton. Anyway, I think that it was in the late 80s that Rush started his show. And up until that time, the news you got out of the news was pretty much the same. It was left bent, but people didn't realize that it was, because that's all they got. There was no alternative. Rush is the one that started the alternative. Rush gave millions of people a voice, a belief, an understanding that there was somebody out there now on a national level giving volume to their voice. And that's why he grew. That's why he became so big. And I would argue, you might disagree, but I would argue that he's had more impact on our society than anyone else since he hit the national scene. he came from a good family down in Cape Girardeau, came to Kansas City, and essentially you could say he started from nothing because when he was here in Kansas City working for the Royals, he was so broke. He tells this story. He was so broke that he had to buy his food on a credit card from a convenience store. I think it was a convenience store that was close to where I live, but I'm not sure about that. And he built the most amazing empire and the most amazing following that you could imagine, just because of his bedrock beliefs, his unbelievable way of articulating his beliefs, his engaging manner. And I think he did more to open up the socially acceptable conservative movement than anybody else ever did. Before that, there had been conservatives, Barry Goldwater. People always, want to slam on McCarthy. But Rush brought a happy face to it, and it engaged a lot of people, and it drew it. Now, the reason that I say that things are better now, and this is for those who think that things are just horrible, worse than they've ever been, they're not. And that's why a political solution to our problems, I believe, is possible. Back when I was in law enforcement, and this is back in the 70s and 80s, I've said this before on, I think, the other channel, only 3 states had concealed carry. And nobody could imagine that any others would. It was not a thing in the cities, certainly. Out in the country, in the smaller towns, and on the outskirts of the cities, you'd have guys, coming to school with their gun rack in the back of the pickup. Nobody thought anything about it. But as far as carrying guns, really it wasn't anything that anybody did except law enforcement. And, if you weren't law enforcement, you needed to show that you had a good reason for it. Either you were a jewelry salesman or a cash courier or something like that, and prove that you needed a permit, and then maybe you could get a permit. But nobody thought that nobody gave it a thought. Nobody talked about Second Amendment rights. And now look what we have. Every state has concealed carry, and more states are becoming constitutional carry states. So that has improved a great deal. You can go to, I was telling some friends of mine the other day, I remember when we had a federal case on a guy because he had a starlight scope. And for those of you, that is rudimentary Vietnam era stuff, a starlight scope, a night scope. And now you can go to Academy Sports or Cabela's anywhere, and you can go not just get night vision, you can get thermal. So that is so much better. Nobody had a rifle of the design of the modern sporting rifles. Occasionally you'd run across someone who did, but nobody gave that a thought. And now they're everywhere. So those who think that things are worse than they've ever been, they're not. They're better than they ever were before. And a lot of that had to do with Rush. What we have, and he spawned so many, and I know some people will jump on that spawn. He created an atmosphere in which so many others then came forward with politically conservative radio shows and things like that. And then came Hannity and Fox News, and I know Fox, I don't see that as conservative either. But from them came OAN and Newsmax and I know that some people will jump on with problems with them. The point is not to tear apart and to criticize the small parts of these things. And if you want any proof that things are better, it is that people have to go after the small things to tear apart now on the so-called conservative side, whereas before they wouldn't have had anything to tear apart. It wouldn't have been there. Okay, so things are better, and it's because of Rush, and so we need to understand that, and we need to understand that no matter how bad things are, We are starting from a much better place than we were back in the 70s and 80s. And so all this doom and gloom talk needs to be turned around, kind of like I talked about in the last one, great and dangerous days or times, whatever it was, and put that quote from Churchill up. We need to realize we're starting from a much better place than we were before Rush. And although the left has become more strident and vitriolic and in your face, and they're much closer to bringing a full-blown communist agenda forward, and that there's a lot of reasons for that, and they'd go on too long on this video if I address those. While they are also showing the face of the enemy to those people, to many people in the middle, that of who they are. And that will have a detrimental effect on them. If you can go back and look at Newt Gingrich's contract with America, when his group of freshman congressmen were able to bring that forward, force Clinton towards the center and then the right on a number of issues. The Democrats had been in control, solid control of the Congress for 40 years. They had been able to do anything they wanted with the help of a complicit media. It just wasn't as heavy-handed as it seems today, but it was just as real. So we're starting from a much better place. We're starting with more freedoms and more avenues, just like these videos, more ways to communicate our views than we had back then. And so there is nothing to complain about. But we do need to address those issues, and we need to direct our energies into fighting this political fight that Rush has put us in a great position to come out of the other end successful. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and you know, that's before we have a lot to be thankful for and a lot to thank Rush for. But don't ever think that things are worse now than they've ever been, because they're not. They are better, and we have a chance to go better from here. So I'll leave it with that, and remind you that America needs a reversion, and it needs a reversion that goes way back. Not just 10 years, 20 years, 50, 100 years. More than that. And I need you to be a part of it. Okay, so I'll let you go with that, and you all have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.